Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us for our live studio talk show. And of course, this particular talk show is going to be in commemoration of the UN International Day in support of victims of torture. And our theme of conversation is rotating around taking stock of the successes and challenges in the fight against torture in Uganda. Now, at the backdrop of this conversation, please note that tomorrow Uganda will be joining the rest of the world to commemorate the United Nations International Day in support of victims of torture. But before that, our conversations will be on taking stock of Uganda's successes and challenges in the fight against torture, reflecting on the progress made in preventing torture, supporting survivors, and then also promoting human dignity, while at the same time examining the actions needed to ensure that everyone can live free from torture and fear. Now, with me here, I have three panelists where our conversation is going to be centered around, and we shall be hearing perspectives from each one of them in the different categories or in the different departments of organizations that they represent in this particular bit of the conversation. Now, closest to me, I do have Ms. Pauline Nansamba, Mrs.
Yes, I'm
Mrs. Pauline Nansamba Mutumba, who is the Director of Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services, Uganda Human Rights Commission. A very good morning, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Joram. Thank you for having us this morning.
Well, we are humbled to be with you as well. And then closest to her is Stephen Okidi. Stephen is a Field Office Coordinator at Adjumani Office for the Refugee Law Project. Stephen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Joram. Thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure being part of this talk show.
Well, and closest to Stephen is Mr. Mugisa Robert, who is a human rights lawyer and advocate, or you could say a human rights defender in the same regard. A very good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Joram. Thank you for having us here on NTV.
Well, I want to start from your side. When you look at our progress as a country, Uganda ratified the United Nations Convention against torture and later strengthened its commitment through the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act 2012. Now, looking back, what would you consider to be Uganda's most significant achievements in preventing torture and at the same time promoting freedom from torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment?
Well, thank you so much for that question. Again, my name is Robert Mugisa. I'm a human rights lawyer and advocate for human rights promotion and protection. Just briefly to respond to your question, when I look at NTV at 20, that's a journey already.
True.
20 years. And now when you ask about the advocacy against torture in Uganda, we are dating back to the UN Convention Against Torture, and then we come to the 1995 Constitution of the Republic of Uganda that really embeds in Article 24 that all of us are humans and we should be free from torture. The right to freedom from torture, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment. From Article 24, you move to Article 44 of the Constitution that provides that the freedom from torture, the right freedom from torture is non-derogable, meaning under no circumstance should you torture anybody, and that's what we mean by non-derogation. So the journey, looking back, we could say progress has been made, because when you look at the journey from around 2018 or before, we had institutions like the Uganda Human Rights Commission and organizations like the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims that stood up and advocated for a specific law to advocate against torture. And that's how we have the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act of 2012, which is now CAP 130 and the laws of Uganda. But also again from 2012, we moved to 2017, where by the order of the minister, we have the regulations of 2017 that really put into effect the act. Moving from 2012 to 2017, then we have cases, that is the role of the courts of judicature, that have really done some work in holding people accountable, perpetrators of torture accountable. And we can share some cases of those who have been found guilty of crimes of torture. But also the effect of these laws is under Section 2 of the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act. Torture is well defined as an act or omission. So it means that the journey has been around sensitizing the masses. We as civil society and individual lawyers, but also in partnership with the Commission, have been advocating and sensitizing, having community dialogues in our different platforms where we have told people about the effect of the law and the types of torture. So a number of people are now aware, and that's why we are having conversations like this, Joram.
And thank you very much for your submission. Stephen, on the same regard, when you look at how far we've come as a country, what would you consider our most significant achievements in preventing all this inhuman bit of, characters, whether cruel or degrading treatment and torture?
Good. Well, Joram, thank you. Looking back, I think Uganda has demonstrated commitment towards combating torture. Firstly, if you look, Uganda took the bold step, firstly by ratifying the Convention Against Torture of 1984. Then it went ahead to by enacting the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act of 2012. But also, these legal frameworks do provide provisions for prevention of torture acts, and also to see to it that the victims and survivors are supported. If you check also, Uganda has given the provision by establishing the Uganda Human Rights Commission, which is the government body that is supposed to be overseeing that torture victims are supported. They are the one who lead in an investigation when cases are reported, and they work not in isolation with a different coalition. We have the coalition of Coalition Against Torture that has about 30 plus stakeholders. But also, despite the progress, there still exist some gaps. As Joram has put it, you realize that much as there is public awareness and continuous education, there is still gap in people's understanding. There is still some limited reporting and people understanding that torture is something that is a collective responsibility for everyone. But also you still realize that there is still some gap in holistic support to victims and the families of the torture survivors. So there is still a lot more that needs to be done amidst the many progress made. Thank you.
All right. Pauline, looking back, do we have achievements yet? What are those achievements in this journey so far?
I think, like my colleagues have shared, the starting point is that we have the framework, a legal framework through which we can speak out. One of the greatest tools that we have when we are advocating is for you to have that recognition that an injustice has been done, and to have a framework through which remedy can be sought. And so, as my colleagues have said, I won't repeat all that they've said, but the fact that under our constitution, torture is, the freedom from torture is a non-derogable right, meaning that under no circumstances whatsoever should a person be tortured. And when we had the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act come in place and provide a framework that clearly defines what torture is, the fact that it may be by an individual, by a public official or any other person. Schedule 2 of that act actually also cites examples of what amounts to torture, to the extent of saying pouring water on somebody, blindfolding somebody. All those details helps to crystallize what torture actually is. So in that sense, we have made progress. The fact that there's a redress mechanism that is available, albeit there are challenges there, because I will tell you, Joram, that on average it takes us about 6 years to investigate our cases currently. Now, if you're taking 6 years to investigate a torture case, the evidence that you're collecting, the witnesses, that delay affects how you're able to present your case before the UHRC tribunal that hears those cases, and if somebody also chooses to go to court. But it's important to acknowledge that there is a framework and the fact that this right is non-derogable. And as Robert said, we work together, we work closely, we go into the communities. Uganda Human Rights Commission has a very broad mandate. So we don't only have the tribunal function, we don't only have the investigative function, but we have a constitutional duty to go out into the communities and sensitize people. So working with our partners, we do this and help raise awareness. For example, in schools, raise awareness in schools, raise awareness around torture that can happen in homes. You know, we engage a lot with our stakeholders, particularly the police and prisons and the army. And so that is progress, because the more people appreciate what the impact of torture is, but also the fact that you're individually responsible for any act of torture that you commit to another person, we see that you have more restraint. In fact, when I look at the complaints we've registered over the last 5 years, we are seeing a drop in number of cases related to torture, and interestingly, we are now having more complaints related to deprivation of liberty. So again, for me, that shows that a lot of sensitization is happening in that area, and we need to step up now in some of these other areas. So there's progress made, but we can do more. One of the challenges that we have where we need to do more is that there's inadequate psychosocial support. Robert talked about ACTV. It's basically the only framework that we have, and it's not a state framework. And of course, that comes with its challenges. I know the Office of the Prime Minister also has internal channels through which it may address refugee concerns around torture, but the state needs to do more to see that there's a strengthened framework, because compensation is good, but there's a lot that happens to a person that has been tortured that money cannot restitute. And so we need to provide stronger frameworks where individuals can get psychosocial support, their families can be supported to see that. Because, for example, some of these people are not able to work again following the extent of torture they've suffered. So what happens to a head of a household? And yes, you've given them maybe a compensation of 50 million shillings. Within 3 years, it is spent up. What happens to the rest? So there's need for us to improve in psychosocial support.
Well, of course, you can be part of this particular conversation by joining us using the hashtag #EndTorture, and you can also use the hashtag UN Day Against Torture and share with us your feedback that is or is with the online conversation as we continue with ours here in studio. Now, Stephen, when you look at supporting survivors beyond the individual torture, you will get to realize that individual torture affects not only the survivor, but also their family members, the loved ones, and everybody who really knows these people, who often carry the emotional, social, and economic burdens to support these people to go through this trauma and everything related to that. From your side as the Refugee Law Project, how do you integrate this understanding into efforts to rehabilitate and protect survivors of torture and inhuman treatment?
Thank you, Joram. The Refugee Law Project understands that the burden of torture extends beyond the individual or the survivor. As you know that when torture is inflicted onto an individual, the burdens and the scars remains with the family members and their loved ones. So Refugee Law Project integrates this understanding into their programming by putting the survivor at the center of every intervention that looks at the survivor. But we know that when one undergoes torture in a different forms, whether it being physically, sexually, or psychologically, this affects their productivity and functionality. So what the Refugee Law Project does to make sure that not only the individual is rehabilitated and protected, we also target the people surrounding them, their immediate household members and the people in the community, by doing what we call the multi-sectoral approach, whereby over the last 10 years, the Refugee Law Project has been able to provide multi-sectoral support to individuals and their households, ranging from specialized medical rehabilitation, psychosocial support, legal aid, pro bono legal aid support, and also livelihood support to individuals and their families. These are all directed to see that if the individual has already maybe gained some form of deformity that limits their functionality and productivity, the household will be able to shoulder the burden of supporting them. Firstly, by diversifying their source of livelihood to make sure that they are able to fill and bridge the gap that is left by the individual. We use also what we call the multi-survivor programming, where we believe that through one individual who gained the confidence and disclosed their experiences, we are able to identify more. Sometimes violation doesn't just happen to an individual, but it can only be reported by an individual. So we believe that when we get to one survivor, they are able to probably refer us to others who could also benefit with the assumption that they will be able to understand and be able to uptake the services that we do provide. And we have been able to see to it that we also document their stories, we archive it for them, and we see that when the time fits and they may probably want to take some steps in maybe seeking legal redress, they have that documentation, but it's at their own interest. We also understand that supporting families also helps to address issues of stigma and also helps to promote long-term recovery, looking beyond just the instant and immediate support that is offered to the torture victims on individual basis. So we find it's very paramount, because if you look at sustainable kind of support that looks beyond immediate program intervention, it's very paramount that we support, firstly, the individual, we extend to the family and the society or community where the individual belongs, because we look at the long-term impact of this support towards their recoveries and regaining of their functionalities and productivity. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. Robert, from your respective experiences, how effectively is Uganda responding to the protection and rehabilitation of the torture survivors?
Well, picking up from the discussion we've had initially, there is significant progress, but sometimes we say that you could make 3 steps forward and 5 steps backward, meaning that a lot is being done, but also some efforts are negatively pulling us down in the fight against torture. Examples of torture have been cited by my colleague, and when you look at the second schedule to the Act, we have physical torture, we have psychological, emotional, but also we have the pharmacological. Those are the 3 types of torture. So in terms of progress, there is a lot of legal medical collaboration that torture manifests in those 3 areas, in those 3 forms, but also organizations like RLP and ACTV have played a big role. Unfortunately, moderator, as we speak now, you realize that from around 9th January 2026, the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, ACTV, is under suspension. And of course, there are processes that are ongoing. Our request would be that such organizations should be really looked into very quickly and allowed to work again, because they do a lot in terms of helping the victims and survivors of torture access the redress. Uganda Human Rights Commission is doing a lot in terms of compensations, advocating for compensations for torture victims, because they have a full tribunal that hears these cases and of course recommends and makes those rulings on some of these issues. So there is progress made. Victims and survivors of torture are able to access redress, but there is still a lot of work to be done, because it's not just the individual, like we've said, it's the entire family that needs this redress. So progress has been made, but my point is a lot still needs to be done. Now, there is a coalition against torture that we've talked about, and the coalition against torture is one of the areas of progress, because we came together and said, you know what, because of the prevalence of torture, there must be a body, there must be a coalition that advocates for an end to torture. It may not be wiped out completely, but as we continue to speak, somebody is listening and noting that there is a group of people, a group of organizations, entities that are working hard to ensure that advocacy moves on to end torture in Uganda. So as we continue to advocate, we believe that it's part of progress. Then the other thing is, just beyond the national level, we have the ordinary sessions of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Uganda has gone there many times and has spoken on those platforms to ensure that, because the African level and the UN level are part of the concrete steps that we take to see that if things are not working well nationally, then at regional and international level, the voices can raise. So we know that every year, again, as civil society, as individuals, as the Commission, which is the National Human Rights Institution, presents issues on issues of torture at the regional and international level. So we are proud that even at that level, voices are being raised.
Well, Pauline, where do you think we've made meaningful progress, and where do we see significant gaps, and how do we fill them up from how we've worked along in responding to the protection and rehabilitation needs of torture survivors?
I think, like I said earlier, I think we've really made progress within our legal framework and providing for the ability for victims, for survivors, I prefer to call them survivors, to get redress. And as Uganda Human Rights Commission, we have been advocating for, because the compensation awards are made by the tribunal, and then there's another process of that victim or that survivor actually receiving that compensation. And we are continuing to advocate for timely payment of those compensation awards. We've engaged with different stakeholders, the Ministry of Justice, with the Ministry of Finance as well, because I think sometimes the institutions, particularly against the institutions, they'll say, oh, we had not budgeted for this, we had not planned for this. So we are having those kind of engagements to see that there is some sort of fund that is, reserved, so that when these compensation awards are made, payment is done in a timely manner. And we've already spoken about the support, advocating for more support, psychosocial support for survivors of torture and their families, to see that these survivors of torture are able to get back into a meaningful life after the traumatic experience that they suffer. So, like I said earlier, that's an area where we feel that there's need for more engagement, and through our different roles, because we don't only handle the tribunal function, but we also do the investigations. We go out into the communities. So we believe that we can do more. We have a dream that one day we will have a human rights village, and that in that human rights village we'll be able to have a space where survivors of torture can come and find counseling and support, even as they pursue other remedies as well.
How effectively have we as a country responded to the needs of the survivors of torture?
Well, Joram, we realize that Uganda has expanded rehabilitation through the different legal frameworks, as we have already hinted on before. Like if you look at the Prevention and Prohibition Act, as also Mugisha put it, but we also realize that there are quite a lot of initiatives that are being undertaken by the different civil societies. For example, the Refugee Law Project, with the generous support of the different donors, including the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Uganda, has been able to support about 74,000 victims and survivors of torture, both nationals and refugees. And this has been through the many different multi-sectoral support, as I highlighted earlier, legal support, psychosocial support, medical, and also livelihoods. But then also, we didn't only just look at supporting individuals and their families, but we also realized that it's paramount if we go beyond and look at enhancing capacities and understandings of the different stakeholders and duty bearers, whereby we have been able to train about 3,900 duty bearers, and this includes the Uganda Police, Uganda Prison Services, the judiciary, who often comes across these and are presented with these cases to deliver justice on, and also we have been able to train medical personnel to understand some of the unique injuries that the forced migrants and also victims of and survivors of torture do present, because we believe that if they understand prevention of torture and responding to the needs of torture survivors and victims, it is important, and that goes a long way. We understand that Uganda has been sending quite a number of personnel for foreign mission, for example, the mission in Somalia, which they have played quite a great role. So we have been privileged to be able to provide trainings, and torture has been one of the aspect that we never left out. So, but amidst all this, you realize that the shrinking funding space is becoming a problem. Uganda is still continuously receiving refugee influx. We have the most recent one, you see Uganda is now hosting Sudanese refugees due to the war that broke out in their country in April 2024. So all this puts a lot of pressure amidst the many progress and calls for further need in terms of availability of funds, but also extensive service provision to victims, their families, and also the communities they live in. We should also continue to provide continuous awareness creation and also have roundtable dialogues with the different duty bearers to see to it that some of the isolated cases that are still coming up can be addressed, and we move forward to end torture and minimize on the impact that comes about with torture in the country and also amongst the refugee communities. Thank you.
Oh, let me get back to Pauline. Torture often robs people of more than their physical well-being. It takes so much of them. It also takes away their confidence. Sometimes they don't even have where to voice their pain. And then when it comes to dignity, one of the things it takes away from them. Yet we know that being heard, believed, and included is an important part of healing. So looking at Uganda today, how well are we creating safe spaces for these survivors?
Thank you, Jerome. I like that question because it contextualizes the impact of torture. You know, sometimes we sometimes take these things lightly and think, oh, somebody was beaten or somebody was humiliated. Even the threat alone is actually also torture. If somebody is in a situation where they fear that imminently they may suffer severe pain or injury, that is torture. So it's important that we recognize that torture has far-lasting impact. And I think one of the things we need to appreciate is to try and quantify the impact of having a society where torture is prevalent. What does it do to people's ability to exercise their other rights and freedoms as well? You know, if we are in a society where there's a fear, how does that impact the community and our ability to develop as a society? So what more can we do? I think we can advocate for stronger legal framework, and this is what I mean, and I think Robert hinted on it. We sometimes see that our jurisprudence gives with one hand and takes away with another. And I understand that this is an area perhaps where we are still developing our jurisprudence, but it is important that our jurisprudence and our legal regime is clear that torture is absolutely not acceptable in any circumstances. So, for example, we recently have a judgment from the High Court that says that medical evidence must be adduced in order to prove torture. Now, we had previously had another High Court judgment in Wanyoto versus Attorney General that had said you do not require medical evidence to prove torture. Now, when we have such, conflicting standards, it has an impact on our confidence in terms of what can be presented to court. Is there a sure remedy in those circumstances? So I think there is need for us collectively to agree that the standard is that torture is a non-derogable right. So whatever jurisprudence is being developed should be to strengthen that position rather than to weaken it. We also need to see more speedy resolution of these. My own experience has shown me from the cases I've handled that many times survivors of torture eventually succumb to their injuries. It may not be direct, it may not be immediate. Some of them go into depression and other related concerns. Others eventually develop, their body is weakened and they're not able to fight disease well, and eventually they die. And yet torture is suffered individually. So it's important that we strengthen timeliness in providing this compensation. And how do we do that? By supporting, and I appreciate that government of Uganda has increased the support to the commission to see that the tribunal hearings are consistent, and so that we are having faster disposal of the cases. But even in other forums like the courts, for court to give it the weight that it deserves, so that these survivors of torture can get remedy. We also need to strengthen our partnerships. To diversify. Yes, we've talked about the Coalition Against Torture. It's 30 members strong. We need more. We need a movement that says no to torture. We have a movement that is saying no to corruption. My wish is to have a movement that cuts across, so that we're not only, it's those human rights people talking about this, but all of us as Ugandans, wherever we are, whether it is in the schools, whether it is in the homes, whether it is state bodies that we are talking to, collectively as a community, we need to strengthen our voice to say torture is wrong and we do not condone it in any circumstances.
Well, and Robert, let me get to you. Justice and accountability are very essential components of recovery for many of the torture survivors. However, for refugees and asylum seekers, alleged perpetrators are often outside Uganda's jurisdiction, which makes formal justice difficult to achieve. But before I get to you, I'd want to first bring in Stephen. When you look at the things of recognizing, or when you look at the case scenario of recognizing that formal justice may not always be possible, particularly for refugees and asylum seekers, what practical approaches can help promote accountability, restore dignity, and support survivors of torture?
Okay, Joram, from the advocacy perspective, restoring voice is already an essential part of healing and recovery. And what we are advocating for currently is that survivors should not only be looked at as beneficiaries, but should be part and parcel of policies and programs. And when we look at these priorities, one should be given to support community-led safe spaces, creating an enabling environment where survivors can openly come out to talk about their experiences, demand for services, and speak up about their experiences, and also demand for their rights. Two, survivors should be put at the center of every activity that is for them. There is this common connotation of nothing for us without us. So we advocate and emphasize that survivors should be put at the center of every activity. But also we need to break the silence. We need to break the silence and speak up without fear when we foresee that justice will be served. Because torture takes away dignity of individuals and also brings about shame and some bit of guilt to the households. People feel the guilt of the failure to protect their very own. So when we look at restoring dignity and making people to hear out their voices, we need to break the silence. Then we need to expand access to legal services and expedited serving of justice to survivors. Often there is a lot of delay in investigations, and there is fear of presenting of witnesses, and people fear to speak up. So we need to create an enabling environment so that survivors can get justice and they restore their dignities and their voices are heard. Thank you.
Okay, let me pick your thought on the same, Pauline. Recognizing that formal justice may not always be possible, particularly for refugees and asylum seekers, what are some of the practical approaches we can use to promote this level of accountability and support survivors in the long run in their journey to healing and recovery? Yeah,
I think like he said, it's important. Your voice is very important. I think it's something we don't emphasize enough. And I want to appreciate NTV. We're talking about NTV at 20. I think NTV has done a good job in breaking the silence in some of these. And I think that's one of the ways. That's why when I said that if we must all have a united voice and not think, oh, this is a human rights issue. Many times, actually, journalists are at the forefront of breaking these stories, you know. But also, as we have increased, where any phone or camera can be a news outlet, we need to advocate for responsible storytelling. I get disturbed when I see a video filmed from beginning to end of a child being tortured, and I don't understand the mind behind the person that, yes, we need the evidence, but for you to allow this to play out for all this while you watch, while you commentate, shows an apathy sometimes within our communities. So it's important that we find creative ways of telling the stories of survivors, so that as they heal, it also gives us a national conscience. I really strongly believe that we need that national conscience that says, as Ugandans, as people living within Uganda, even though refugees, this is a standard that we uphold. We uphold the inherent human dignity of every person, whether they're a child, whether they're an adult. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is also on hand in situations where refugees are concerned. As Uganda Human Rights Commission, when we get some of those concerns from migrants, refugees, we're able to refer those. And the progress is slow, but at least it's there. And I think that working closely together, where we don't see the state and civil society and the fourth estate and the public as separate, but we realize that we have a collective responsibility to ensure that there's justice. I think that advocacy is a very big tool. Actually, advocacy can even be a louder tool than this one compensation that you give to this one individual, because money runs out, Joram, you know, and then after that, what next? So I think we need to collectively, we need to strengthen our partnerships across the board to see that we speak out strongly against torture and its impact.
Well, as we stick to the conversation here, I'm just reminding you about tomorrow's bit of the reason as why we're here, because tomorrow the rest of the world and Uganda, or the entire world, will be celebrating or commemorating the United Nations International Day in support of victims of torture. And our conversation here is centered around the theme of taking stock of the successes and challenges in the fight against torture in Uganda, with the hashtag End Torture, hashtag Support Survivors, hashtag UN Day Against Torture. That is for you who's following the proceedings live on NTV's X account. Well, Robert, let me take you back into our conversation. What practical approaches, again, can we use to restore dignity in the long run? Because as much as we are looking at the healing, but we need justice and accountability for all involved.
Thank you. I won't differ much from what Pauline and Lydia have said, Kidi. But the key principle here, or the approach we need to look at, is the do no harm principle for torture survivors and victims. Because when we talk about refugees and asylum seekers vis-a-vis the citizens, there is a complaint that people who are asylum seekers and refugees in those camps, talk of Bidibidi, talk of Changwari and others, they seem to get much more care and attention than the citizens. Why? It's because no one gets into this country without the knowledge of the responsible officers. So once they are here, then they deserve that protection. And we cannot, already they have that mindset of they are affected by war, they are affected by issues in their countries, and they are trying to settle in an environment that has hosted them and telling them everything is going to be fine. So we don't want to harm them anymore. So in addition to what my colleague said, we are trying as much as possible to reduce the harm upon these people. So don't torture them, don't remind them of their pain. Instead, help them to recover, help them to get better, help them to live a life that is deserving. So that's one of the approaches in terms of not doing any more harm, but also utilizing the available mechanisms. The Office of the Prime Minister plays a big role here. So the different ministries, departments, and agencies can be approached when these people have problems, when victims of torture have issues. We've advised them to always reach out to us, but also to reach out to the available offices. The Commission is open, and we've always advised people, reach out to the Commission anytime, anywhere. They have toll-free numbers. If you see anybody being tortured or treated in a way that is inhuman, degrading, cruel, pick the phone and call those numbers. So that means as stakeholders, we also have the responsibility of ensuring that these mechanisms are visible and available to the people that need to utilize them. But also the approach of duty bearers versus rights holders. Section 4 of the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act provides that anybody who commits an act of torture is liable upon conviction to imprisonment for 15 years or a fine of 36 currency points. Now, about 7.2 million. And now the good thing with the law is that it provides for individual liability. So we are no longer in the era that Uganda Police Force will be taken on, Uganda People's Defense Forces. No, it's that individual, corporal so-and-so, sergeant so-and-so, officer so-and-so, that will be held individually liable. So when you consider the fact that your salary is less than probably 2 million, and the fine that is pressed against you for torturing is up to 7.2 million, then we think the approach of bringing the law into your face is helping you to remember that any single act of torture is going to land you into even more problems. And we've continued to advocate that all people should be responsible enough. Duty bearers should know their duties. That is the duty to ensure that no one is tortured, but also the rights holders still have the right to report whenever these issues arise. So those approaches are helping us a lot in the fight against torture.
Right, now, as we bring our conversation to a close or to an end, I'm going to be taking your parting shots. But in your parting shots, I would want to hear what should we do moving forward as a country, as the community, and then also every other stakeholder involved to ensure that we support the survivors of torture. But then we also need to know where should our priorities be moving forward. I'll start with Pauline, then move on to Stephen, and then finally Robert.
Oh, Jerome, that's a mouthful of a question. Moving forward, what would we want to see as Uganda Human Rights Commission? One is we would want to see more of prevention, more effort put in preventing torture. And how do we achieve this? by speaking out more. Okay, so I'm speaking this in the context of what our mandate is. Speaking out more about torture, engaging with the different duty bearers, as Robert has said, and this is something that we do on a continuous basis. And I want to say that I believe that the duty bearers know their responsibility. They know their responsibility. They know the impact of failing on that responsibility. And in my interaction with most state, with the prisons and police, I actually find that they are very aware and they are very supportive. And I think we need to give credit where it's due. We've seen a reduction in cases of torture. We've seen better handling of suspects and of prisoners. And so I actually feel that the burden now shifts more into the communities. Recognizing our responsibility. What's my responsibility to that child? Recently, there was a child who was beaten to death in a school. I mean, for failing the paper or something like that. It was, for me, that shows that we have not yet appreciated the impact of what torture has. Of what torture can. What do you tell that parent? What do you tell that mother? What do you tell that father? So we need to speak out more, and of course that requires that we partner more and that we have more resources to do that. I can't overemphasize the need for compensation, for restitution. You cannot take away the pain that has been caused, but at least if there is timely, and my emphasis is on timeliness. Let's see that there's timely redress, that cases don't drag on for so long, that compensation is paid in a timely manner, so that, because many times these victims of torture actually don't even have the capacity to treat themselves. They are selling off what little they have to be able to meet medical bills. So the timeliness of compensation is paramount, and coordinating among ourselves to see that we speak with one voice against torture.
Well, thank you very much for your point there as we're summing up as well. Stephen, where should we focus? Where should our priorities be moving forward?
Moving forward, on consolidating the gains that have already been made, as I made mention earlier on the issue of fear and silence, you realize that there is this problem of the victims and the witnesses fearing coming out on the basis of retaliation, shame, and also being taken as part of the problem. So there is need for creation of safe spaces for witnesses to come forward and present their sides of the stories, and also to support the survivors on the different violations that they experience. But then also you realize that the government needs to fully implement the Prohibition and Prevention of Torture Act. There is need to be very purposeful and also intentional in its implementation, because you realize that much as there is very clearly explained ways of addressing the different violations that individuals probably suffer, we realize that there is limited facilitation for implementation of these policies. The burden now comes to the government parastatal, like the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and the different civil society communities. But we realize also that it's not a very comfortable period of time, where there is shrinking funding to many implementing partners and operational partners in the country. So we need to take an approach that brings on board the community. Firstly, the community need to take up the responsibility of rejecting tortures in the different settings. We have witnessed in the recent time quite a number of them that unfortunately resulted in 2 lives being lost. Remember the popular rugby player that was tortured in Bukoto and had unfortunately lost his life. May his soul rest in peace. But also what Mrs. Nansamba also made mention of, the pupil or student who was tortured just because of not a very comfortable performance that probably, unfortunately, led to her life being lost. So the community needs to come up to reject tortures in the different spaces that they occupy. But then also, they need to come out and encourage people who witness this kind of violations to confidently move to the authorities and report cases that they have witnessed. And also, maybe the donor community also needs to see to it that we fully consolidate onto these gains that we have, that we are trying to move forward. Because if you look back about 20, 30 years ago, Uganda is not where it was in terms of prevention and prohibition of torture. So we need maybe a long-term kind of approaches that looks at prevention and ending torture in the different communities, both in the, but also you realize that if you look currently, Uganda is receiving refugees from Sudan through South Sudan and Adjumani, but others also come through the airport. And you realize that of the many that comes, about 3 to 4 of them presents cases of experiences of torture. So maybe, and also there are some isolated cases whereby survivors are forced to live with their violators, because now the case happened probably from a different country, and the survivor is able to point out someone who probably tortured them from their country of origin, but this is already a different jurisdiction. So Uganda can't start pursuing such a case. So there is need to have maybe discussions around what then happens, because living in fear of maybe of possible reoccurrence of the previous experience. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for your submission. Then finally, Robert, what is the way forward?
Thank you. Let's continue using platforms like this. We thank NTV for creating this space. And for me, the media plays a very critical role. Each of us has a smartphone, and now that we are establishing contacts with you, Joram, it's important that we keep in touch, but also keep the discussion going online and everywhere else that we can discuss such issues. The other one is around everyone knowing that they are human rights defenders. We have what we call the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders of 1998, and Article 1 provides that each of us has the role to protect and defend human rights. So it starts with you. There is a famous musician who says, today is me, tomorrow is someone else. So you might think torture is very far from you, but until you get into that fix that you're the one being tortured or a relative, then you realize that advocacy must start with you to see that torture ends everywhere. The other one is documentation. Many of us are documenting cases of torture, but I've talked about doing no harm, protecting the survivors. As we document, we should be very mindful that some of these victims are not going to speak directly to us because of the fear that Pauline talked about that they have. If I tell Robert about my issue, he might end up spilling it and I get problems. So we need to find approaches that are very good that we can use to get information, and once we have that information, ensure that survivors are helped, but also without bringing their cases forward to expose them even more. The other one is around fundraising. Coming on air today is not something very simple. So we need to keep conversations moving, but it also takes a cost. So the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Austrian Development Agency have been very pivotal in supporting these initiatives, and we call upon them to continue hearing our voices and supporting these initiatives, so that as we speak today, the Human Rights Commission is involved, but also we want more partners to be involved, ministries, agencies, and departments, but also civil society and individuals, so that our voice collaboratively can be able to yield the result that we look for, which is end torture.
Wow.
Yep.
Thank you indeed. And the result is end torture, meaning this is a message that is open to all of us. Do not be a perpetrator of torture. Do not be a supporter of torture. And if at all you've landed or maybe conditions or situations have landed you in an area or a community with torture survivors, you never know whether the kind of words that you would use, or maybe the support, maybe emotional, financial, however little it can really, really help and push this person into healing. And you never know how far their journey can go after that simple support you may have laid. 3 of my guests have done their bit of things, but allow me to reintroduce them as we sum up with our conversation. Closest to me is Mrs. Pauline Nansamba Mutumba, Director, Complaints Investigations and Legal Services, Uganda Human Rights Commission. Thank you very much, Pauline, for joining us.
Thank you for having
and
us
then
here.
closest to her is Stephen Okidi, Field Office Coordinator at the Refugee Law Project, Adjumani Office. And then Mugisa Robert, human rights lawyer and advocate, who has also been part of this conversation. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for being part of it. I'm Joram Paul Sonko. Keep it NTV. The hashtag for you to engage in our conversation is End Torture and also support survivors. And the other hashtag is UN Day Against Torture. Good afternoon.